Greetings and welcome to the Department of Tangents podcast, episode 34, a conversation with comedian and author Erin Judge with new music from Zion Rodman. You may remember I spoke with Erin back in April for the Women in Comedy Festival edition of the podcast, and now, the day this podcast is being released, it's the one-year anniversary of the release of her novel, Vow of Celibacy. I've had the pleasure to see Judge come up through the Boston stand-up scene, now she's out in Los Angeles, and her comedy has always been smart and socially aware. And the book is no different. Judge writes about Natalie, a woman working in the fashion industry who has vowed to abstain from sex until she can figure out her life. Natalie's is a story of continuing self-discovery at work and in her relationships with her friends and lovers. It's a highly entertaining read that also touches on issues of body image and sexuality. It won Best Fiction at the Buy Book Awards, and it's on sale all through August for $1.99 on Kindle. We talked about the book, the storyline, and how, though they share some traits in common, Erin is not Natalie. We also covered stand-up and politics, Ghostbusters and Wonder Woman trolls, and the recent Cake Comedy Kickstarter tour, and the follow-up book that Judge may or may not write. Also, stick around after the conversation for Photograph of the Future, a new song from Zion Rodman's debut album, You're Invited. And now, Erin Judge. Congratulations, by the way, on the one-year anniversary of the release of Vow of Celibacy.
Thank you.
And we'll mention up front that you have a sale going on the book on Amazon right now, $1.99.
Yeah, on Kindle for the whole month, the e-version of the book.
And when we spoke about the book for the Globe last year, you said you wrote it because smart girls need to go to the beach, too. I was wondering if you'd wanted to explain that and sort of the nature of the book up front.
The book is a fun, upbeat, fast-paced novel about female friendship and relationships. Mm-hmm. In the last year, a lot of my male friends, because, coming from stand-up comedy, I have, a preponderance of male colleagues. A lot of them have read it, and they've been really, excited about it. So that's been an interesting thing. I think as a woman creator, we often see ourselves as creating for women. Mm-hmm. But a lot of my male friends who've read the book have had a lot of really positive things to say about how they enjoyed it and they thought it was funny and sexy and great. And so that's been an interesting perspective for me to absorb. And it's been a really flattering and happy surprise, I guess. And I guess I'm starting to realize that my own view of it, my own filter of putting it on it and saying this is for women was probably a little bit internalized screwed upness. So yeah, I mean, if there are men out there, and there are, who enjoy a female protagonist, this is a perfectly excellent book for anybody who enjoys reading contemporary fiction. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's definitely a fun, fast-paced read. A lot of people who've read it on the reviewing sites like Goodreads and stuff, they say they read it in a day or two. Mm. So it's a quick read, and people breeze through it, which is really nice. It's both nice to hear and a little bit startling. Because, I spent 10 years on it, so not quite 10. Probably more 4 to write it and get it all done, and then 2 to put it out. So 6 years, and then hearing people be like, I read it in a day. So awesome that you enjoyed it so much. Yes. That was a really long process for me.
And you wanted it to take them 10 years to read it just because it took you 10 years to write it. You want that experience to balance out somehow.
Exactly. Everybody should read one word every 3 days. And
well, it's
and then
when you're working on something like this, I would think you put so much work on the back end of it to not really know what's going to happen when you throw it out into the world. It must be daunting.
Yeah, I mean, a novel is so different from anything else that I've created and put out into the world because it does take such a long time and so much effort. And when you're writing a nonfiction book, you write a proposal and you go out to sell the book with your agent or whomever before you've written it. So you have the opportunity to write the book for the most part after you've sold it. And you have your book advance, and it's there to help you support yourself while you write. With fiction, you have to go out with the whole book. Like, it has to be done. And that's a really different process. And again, like, since most of my friends are comedians, I mostly know people who have nonfiction books. So the experience is really different, and it's really intimidating to have this completed project and then be like, hopefully somebody wants it. If not, then it won't see the light of day, even though I've written a 300-page book.
Right, and it's not, it doesn't settle, I don't think, anyways, into a very narrow genre niche or a narrow predefined genre niche as well. So, or do you believe it does?
I think one of the reasons it's hard to categorize is because it's contemporary fiction, but like literary fiction tends to make people think of like very serious books, like Colson Whitehead or like Lincoln in the Bardo, like these big American novels with big themes, and it's also got some elements of like high school, like there's a lot of flashback type stuff to high school. So it's like got YA elements as well. And, it's this sort of, like I said, like a fast-paced, fun story. It probably would have been categorized as chick lit at some point, but that's less and less of a category. Plus, chick lit is very associated with being straight, like straight women, heterosexual problems. And the protagonist in this book is not straight. She's bisexual. So there's a lot of ways in which it's just outside of what people might expect in any given category.
Well, were you writing it for a particular audience, or were you just telling the story that you had in your head?
I really was just telling the story that I had in my head, and I think in terms of the audience orientation, I just wanted to entertain the reader. Like I kind of figured if I could make something that whomever picked it up would find witty and fast-paced and fun, that would compensate for the fact that the genre was less deliberate. The genre was less circumscribed.
And yet you're surprised when your male colleagues enjoyed it. So there must have been some sort of notion that there was an audience that would enjoy this more, or that you might need to target.
Yeah, I mean, it's a first-person story from the perspective of a woman in her early 30s, And so it's traditionally, I think that a lot of that kind of content is directed at women who are around that age, like in their 20s or 30s or 40s. So, I mean, I guess that was sort of also, honestly, like, men just read fewer novels than women. Women are more likely to, like, be in a book club or read a novel. So it's interesting because the market for literature in general is so female that I just sort of assumed, in my mind, it was just like, that's who's going to be reading this.
Do you think that's more of a matter of marketing, or is that a natural tendency, you think, of how that sort of splits along gender lines, what people read?
I don't know if it's natural. I think it's interesting, right? Like, I think it's interesting that men read fewer, like, men are less likely to read nonfiction than women. Read fiction than women. Especially because, so many of our literary titans are still men. And so many of the prizes and so many of the writers for literary magazines, contributors, and even just journalists and essayists, like, men are much more prominent. I know, like, this month, I think Wired, I should probably look this up before I say this on the record, but Wired put out an issue of their magazine where there were no articles by women. And that still happens.
What are your thoughts when you see that happen?
I think it's something that people don't even notice. I think if somebody pictures, most prominent jobs in our society, I think that there's still this mindset of when you ask somebody to picture somebody with that job, they picture a man. with that job, with the exception of jobs that we associate with women, like kindergarten teacher or nurse, you know?
Right.
I think for the most part, that sort of default setting in editors' minds is something that goes without them noticing. And when, like, for example, a magazine or a TV show notices, oh, we only have male writers here, what are we going to do about it? They, like, go out to find women to plug in. And, like, I think that that's a problem, right? Like,
right.
You should be considering all the writers out there. One of the things I notice as I get further along in my career as a comedian and as a writer is that hiring a woman is seen as taking a bigger risk.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's sort of like you hire a man, like, he'll either work out or he won't, and you have confidence that he will.
Mm-hmm.
But if you hire a woman, it's like, well, am I, like, making the right decision? Like, is she going to mess everything up? If she does mess everything up, is that going to be bad for all women? And will it be my fault because I hired this woman, et cetera, et cetera? Then fewer women get hired, and it's just like psychology is very deep.
Yeah, that was the that was sort of the old problem in stand-up comedy too. That was the I remember Jeanine Garofalo said it. I'm not sure if she's the first one who said it, but she explained that sort of in the when stand-up stood out. Bookers booking female comics, they would say something like, well, we had a female comic here last week, so we
and they didn't like her, so we're never having one again.
Right.
So that's sort of the problem. And, like, the subtle and overt ways in which women in those situations are set up to fail, like by the MC, for example, are really hard for people to recognize. But they're there, you know?
I think the main challenge is, well, how do you change that? Do you change that within that institution, or do you need completely new institutions to do it?
I mean, I think that we're moving towards greater parity in a lot of ways, and there are a lot of really talented people leading the path around that. And I also think that there's some really subtle cultural changes that are happening that I think are really, really fantastic. I think that having movies like Frozen and Moana, that little boys and little girls are, like, brought up to embrace, it creates the ability for men and boys to, like, project themselves onto a female protagonist, right? So we've always sort of trained young women and girls, like, yeah, like, you know, here, read all these books about a boy, and you're supposed to identify with the boy. He's the main character. And when there's a woman character or a female character, a little girl character, boys are kind of taught to objectify her or to think of that particular thing, like the Little Mermaid, as not for them. You know, I think that that's changing.
Yeah,
I think that fluidity is really important.
There's a sort of a normalization, but it also comes with when you're putting something in the mainstream, people who are more politically minded will sort of dismiss it as mainstream. I saw some people talked about Wonder Woman, for example, saying, well, it's not really a feminist movie, but it's also the first time we've really had a major female superhero on a big budget box office film, I believe. I can't think of a major...
certainly for a comic book hero.
Yeah, for
like
a comic
one of
book
these universes in this sort of contemporary comic book movie phenomenon. So that's definitely, I mean, and it's also like she's the first. It's the first one directed by a woman that has a budget like this. You know, and that's important too.
And it's not if you watch the movie, it's still about superheroes. It's not heavy on feminism, but it's still sort of mainstreaming a female hero. So there's a delicate balance there between what you're presenting as purposefully political and what's just sort of a normalization of something that probably should have been done years ago?
I think in my experience, like from what I've seen, whenever you're like bringing some more marginalized population into the mainstream, other people from that marginalized population are going to criticize what you do. Like that's just a natural course of things, and it comes, I think, from being so underrepresented that you get upset when you feel like any potential representation doesn't capture the truth of who you are. But you know, it's like the privilege of being like, you know, a dude in some ways is just like, there's so many people to choose from. There's so many characters and protagonists to choose from that you can kind of project yourself onto different elements. And you don't have to be like, this particular superhero is exactly who I am.
Right. I am Wonder Woman. I think the another sort of problem with that is that if you're bringing a marginalized community into the mainstream, usually that's happening in cooperation with somebody already in the mainstream, which makes that project a target.
For sure. And I think that there's also the reaction, right? So there's like the community in question, whether it's women or queer people or whomever, who are going to be like, you know, there's a lot of things wrong with this particular manifestation of this. And then there's going to be like all these people who are like, Ghostbusters with women ruined my childhood, and it's like, okay, like,
retroactively,
get really offended by not being represented at all times.
Right. Yeah, I was going to mention that it's strange that particularly bitter reaction that the female Ghostbusters movie produced. It didn't happen in Wonder Woman. So is that comparable? Is that is it apples and oranges to compare the two movies? Why did one succeed and get fanboy approval and the other one get treated so poorly?
Well, I mean, there were definitely people who trolled Wonder Woman just as bad as Ghostbusters. There was like a whole controversy among the alt-right about the fact that like there was a Alamo Draft House showing that was all women.
Yes.
They like only wanted women in the theater, and they were like, "This is sexism. I'm being discriminated against." So, you know, it's like there were reactions as well. I think that the Ghostbusters thing was a remake, right? So it's like we're recasting this with people. It was, or a reboot rather, not a remake, but like the idea that those characters would be recast as women. I think that a lot of young boys grew up dreaming that they could be the next Egon, you know? And so the idea that would be something that they weren't eligible for.
I was always a Ray Stantz guy myself as a kid. I actually did dress up like a Ghostbuster for at least one Halloween and for at least one school dance.
Well, you know, I mean, I think that those were really real things, but also, like, girls did that too, right? Like, I mean, I have a lot of female friends who grew up with Ghostbusters being their favorite movie, and they knew all the lines, and they memorized all of Bill Murray's, you know, everything that he said in the movie. And that idea that we also project ourselves onto these dudes, it's like there's a blind spot in some people's minds for that phenomenon. You know, like my favorite movie when I was a kid was Ferris Bueller, and I wasn't projecting myself onto his girlfriend. You know, I was like, being Ferris Bueller seems really cool. This movie's really funny. It would be fun to be like making a project like this or be a kid like this. You know, and it wasn't like I was like, wow, I wish Ferris Bueller would date me. You know,
Right.
It was like, I want to be this guy. Look at him. He's on the parade float.
My biggest problem with the Ghostbusters movie, oddly enough, going in, was the cameos by the former by the stars of the original. I thought it was a little ham-fisted how they put them in there, and that was it. It was constantly reminding you of the old franchise, and it didn't sort of.
I think that there's
give you room to make.
There was like the comparison was being embraced.
Yeah.
And therefore it was like highlighting those differences. I mean, I think the biggest thing for me with those movies, I think Kate McKinnon was well utilized in Ghostbusters, but not Melissa McCarthy, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, it's so rare to see an ensemble cast of these hilarious women where they're all used to, like, the best possible extent.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I really thought Girls Trip was, like, really, really, really funny, and everybody contributed. And they got so much out of all four of those performers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, you know, if you look at, like, Melissa McCarthy in Spy, she's brilliant. And I feel like in Ghostbusters, that wasn't there.
Well, she was more physical, I think, in Spy than she was in Ghostbusters. And I kind of liked the idea that they didn't make her character sort of inherently slapstick in Ghostbusters.
I feel like in Spy, I mean, I think in Bridesmaids, or what's the one? Is it Bridesmaids? In Bridesmaids, there's so many movies that have, like, brides or bridal party or something in the title.
Uh-huh.
In Bridesmaids, she was really physical. Like, it was like she was very limited to, like, sight gags almost. And, like, her the physical imposingness of her character weighed on every line she said.
Yeah.
But in Spy, I felt like there was, like, chase scenes and pratfalls, but she's just also being hilarious the entire time.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like she did every kind of comedy in that movie.
The Heat is still my favorite of hers.
I actually haven't seen that.
Yo, you still, it's being a Boston comic, you will enjoy it. As I spent half the movie going, oh, there's Tony V. You know, there's somebody else that I know in a scene. You know, there's Patty Ross, who's got a small but fantastic role that
that's great.
We talked about. I was more excited about seeing Tony V in The Town than I was about the rest of the movie. The Town, and he plays he plays an electrical guy, and he's in there for 15 seconds, and you know, part of me has to keep him shouting, "Oh, look, it's someone I know."
Totally.
But to get back to the book, you talked about a sort of not projecting onto Ferris Bueller. When people read the book, do they think that you're Natalie because you have some of the same characteristics physically or and biographically?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they assume. I think people generally assume first-time novelists are writing an autobiography.
Mm-hmm.
That there's, like, a lot of veiled memoir type stuff going on. It's common for women first novelists. I think it's common for all first-time novelists. People really want to know how much of it is true. And story, like you said, like, physically, she's got some physical resemblance to me, and she's also bisexual like I am. But other than that, like, she doesn't have the same background as me. She didn't grow up in the same place. She doesn't have the same family structure. She doesn't have the same kind of high school. She doesn't have the same kind of college. Like, she doesn't have the same career interests. Like, she has really different relationship problems than I do or ever did. So, you know, it's like I was making something up to create fiction. You know, stand-up comedy is very autobiographical. If people want to know about me, that's the place to look. But the book is like an invention. But I mean, I've started to be, I guess, a little less sensitive about people wondering about my connection to the character. But it is kind of fun to be like, nope, that didn't happen. Nope, that's not real. Nope, made that up. I was doing my audiobook recording, and the engineer, his parents are English, and the character that is the main character is Natalie, and her best friend is Staves. And Staves is English and has, like, she goes, her dad is like a professor and all this other stuff, and this guy was like, my engineer was like, oh my gosh, this is like so many people I know. Is she based on a real person? I was like, no, not at all. So that was like both kind of cool. You know, I mean, it was super cool, right? Because he was like, she's got to be based on a real person. And as somebody who made her up, I was like so relieved to hear him insisting on that, you know?
Well, did you start with the similarities and diverge from there when you were creating the character? Or did you start building a character and a story arc and wind up using some of your life to ground a couple of elements?
I mean, I think that the goal when I started this project was, like, I wanted to kind of tell a story in a setting of, being in the Boston area that I was familiar with, that was bringing in elements of the stuff that I had been exposed to through my friend Samantha, who was the fashion editor of The Improper Bostonian, who put me on the cover of the magazine. And then after that, I started hanging out with her and, like, getting invited to all these events around the fashion industry in Boston. And I was fascinated by it. I'm like, this needs to be, like, a TV show or something. So I wrote a book about it. Or at least where it plays in, as heavily factors in. And so that was a big part of the motivation, was just how rich this felt as material for, fiction. And, like, it was like this slice of glamour and stuff that if you're in a, like, not a major city, if you're not in New York, you might be less aware of how much there is.
And how important was it to you to be able to talk about bisexuality and talk about body image in this? Was the story a vehicle for that sort of thing? Did you see those as incidental issues, or is there really a point you wanted to?
Yeah, bisexuality and body image were definitely two of the main themes that I wanted to bring to the book. I wanted to talk about just sort of like having the perspective, like a lot of bisexual characters on TV and in popular fiction and in movies aren't written by bisexual people. The creators aren't of that group. Not that that's a problem. Like, people can make whatever they want. But, I was like, it feels like a missing perspective. There's a ton of YA out there with bisexual protagonists, but, like, written by bisexual writers. But I really wanted to write adult contemporary fiction with a bisexual protagonist, just to try and give people a first-person perspective of it. And with body image, I think that, like, sex positivity and body image, I wanted to, like, play with the intersection of those two things. So it's like I wanted to write a story where it was, like, somebody who was struggling with body image issues, but, like, wasn't afraid of sex. Because I think that too often those things are conflated.
The being afraid of sex and body issue images? Yes.
That, like, having body image issues is super tied up in that stuff, and that you avoid, like, if you have body image issues, you avoid being sexual. And that's not always true.
Yeah, I can't think of too many examples of that in film or TV. I don't know how many there might be in the literary world. I know it's not presented.
I mean, it's really like there's this link that's just drawn automatically between having a struggle with your body image and being afraid of sex, and that's not necessarily true. Like, people can have like neuroses or have, like, issues or have hang-ups from childhood and still be really able to, like, be physically intimate with people without having any of that, like, mess it all up for them.
Now, when you were writing the book, did you know there was a Bisexual Writers Association? You won Best Fiction Award, and you were nominated for Writer of the Year by the Bisexual Writers Association.
I know. That was an amazing thing. And the answer is no. I didn't know that was out there. And I think it's really wonderful that there are, like, there's the Bi Writers Association, they do the Bisexual Book Awards, and then there's also, Lambda, and there's lots of Twitter accounts and specific librarians and all kinds of people who are promoting LGBT literature. So, like, that was awesome that these people have, like, embraced the book and are, like, talking about it. Like, it's just really exciting, and I'm just glad that it's all out there. But I wasn't aware before I wrote the book.
Have you discovered a lot more fiction in this vein since you wrote the book? I mean, you were just in I'm blanking on the name of the publication, but somebody listed your book among 7 others that talked about bisexuality without focusing on someone's sex life.
Yeah, the Autostraddle article.
What was it again?
Straddle is a lesbian website and for queer women, for lesbian, bisexual, queer identified women, which is awesome. It's a great resource. They write about all kinds of stuff. I love Straddle. But yeah, like the books that they listed are all really great. And like I said, like the really surprising thing to me is that there's so much YA out there about basically any demographic that you are interested in. Like it's really a rich genre.
But has this whole world of fiction sort of opened up to you since you released the book? Have you found a lot more than maybe you thought was there?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of writers writing really great stuff about it. And I think that in general, like literary fiction is still a little bit like I would like to see more, and I'm learning more and more about literary fiction. Like that's generally what I've read historically, and then it's the stuff that like gets reviewed in the New York Times and like gets all the prominence in terms of like the cultural narratives. So it's really the stuff that I've been exposed to more from being a writer are the genres. Genres like romance, and how many different types of romance there are. Different categories, different like audiences, different. It's just really, really amazing. And then YA is incredible, and like I think also like some of the sci-fi, speculative, and fantasy stuff has a tremendous emphasis on diversity as well.
There's a lot of political writing being done in surprising genres. I would think there's a lot of it. There's a lot of feminist horror movies out there, and literature that I don't think that the mainstream public might not necessarily associate that genre, other than every once in a while people realize that George Romero had some social critiquing to do. But there's
George Romero's daughter is one of my closest friends, and she's a feminist filmmaker, and so like she does a lot of really interesting like music videos and content like that, and the films that she's made are really, really cool. So I have some exposure to that. But yeah, I mean, sometimes the sort of canonical criticism academy type voices don't acknowledge the power of certain genres. I mean, I think people for the most part got really excited about Get Out and how political and timely it was. In addition to being super entertaining and like a great horror movie. But I think in general, like the fact that it took a while to get momentum to make the like that there were studios that were reluctant to get involved with the movie when it was being pitched. Like that to me is sort of the flip side of that. Like there's all these like publishers or studios or all these like entities that are still reluctant to pick up diverse stories.
I mean, I just...
And so some of those gatekeepers are kind of bad judges of what audiences want.
Right. Well, I mean, look at the success of Get Out, and you can go back to the Stepford Wives, and Get Out takes a lot from not to take anything away from Get Out because I love the movie. But there's a precedent for this type of thing, and there are a lot of elements that carried over from the Stepford Wives. I'm not sure if people view that as a horror film. I'm not sure they do even.
I don't know. Horror is so referential. That's one of the like coolest things about it. And I think I feel like Stepford Wives, like I think people group that in with like Hitchcock stuff. Like I don't know if it's horror, but it's like psychological.
Which is still horror, yeah. It's like some people want to separate. Some people want to say that that Richard Pryor was something more than a comedian. It's like, well, no, he's just a really good comedian. They want to sort of separate the best of the. They want to separate the.
Interesting thing too, like people will try to be like, well, Harry Potter is not a children's book. It's like, yes, it is. Like,
yes.
Like if you want to lift something out of its genre in order to say that it's good, there's something wrong with your prejudice against that genre.
Right. Yeah, I think horror suffers that. I think comedy suffers that frequently.
I mean, it's always really funny to me and really strange when, like, Adam Sandler, gets praised, or somebody like that, for, like, being able to do drama.
Uh-huh.
It's like, dude, drama's not the hard part. It is so much harder to make people laugh than to make them cry.
Right, because they're more... Well, why do you think that is? It's because they're more resistant to one or the other?
I just think that it's a different trick. People, if you look at, like, what people sit around in college and discuss, right, in actual formal settings, they sit around and discuss serious things. We have all these analyses that we've done of drama, but, like, nobody sits in, very rarely are people like, okay, let's sit around in this seminar and discuss why this is funny and how you make it funny and how comedy works. You know? So it's something where we almost deliberately, like, as a culture and as a society, like, keep it in a black box, the sort of the how the sausage is made of comedy.
Uh-huh.
And I think a lot of it, being a comedian myself, a lot of it is, like, how you end up coming to learn how to make people laugh.
Mm-hmm.
It's just different than you expect it to be. Whereas in my experience, writing drama is pretty much exactly the way you expect it to be.
Well, in humor, there's that element of surprising somebody, of taking that left turn that's so important, and maybe people are less easily surprised these days. Might that be an element of it?
I think that might be part of it. I think that so much of it is also the authenticity that you have to come to it with. Like, people can't feel like they're being set up. You know? It's like the way advertising is always trying to stay ahead of people's cynicism about advertising. Comedy is just inherently that way. Like, people are like, some people are... If you're ever in front of people who are like an easy laugh, like too easy of a laugh, it'll mess up your stand-up routine. They'll be laughing at setups. Like, you're like, I need you to be resisting me for this part of the joke. Like, I need you to, like, you realize that, like, you don't want them to be 100% on your team. Right. It makes everything kind of be screwed up if they are.
Right. Well, I guess that leads to the question: where are the frontiers in comedy? Where do we get to the point, or can we get to the point where we've explored every way to make that left turn and to surprise people, and they'll always see it coming? So maybe the only thing we have left is just really bizarre, absurdist comedy.
No, man. I mean, it's really interesting because my best friend and I did a play together, like 7 years ago, and she's trained she like went to clown college. Like, she seriously did, and this was The Meaning of Wife, which was a play that we did in Boston and New York.
Yes.
And she has, like, classical theatrical training. And she choreographed some physical comedy for me to do that was, like, so funny that I'd never done anything like that before, but she knew exactly where to hit the beats, and it worked, and it's just always funny. And there are things from, like, ancient Greece that people laughed at, that we will still laugh at if it's well done. And then when there was, like, elements where we were trying to, like, there was one point in which we each did, like, a little monologue while the other one was sort of changing backstage. And it was really hard for her to deliver like a comedian with the sort of, like, unassuming, relaxed, no fourth wall type delivery that stand-up comedians have. I was sort of assuming that I could just coach her to do that. And it was really, really, really difficult because I've put in my 10,000 hours doing that kind of thing. And, coming to that level of rapport with an audience takes time for most people. It's not a performance, exactly. It is, but it's so different from, like, presenting a play, singing a song, or doing a dance.
Right. And can anybody do it if they put in the 10,000 hours, or is there something innate in certain people that allows them?
I think anybody can do it if they put in the 10,000 hours. I really do. I think that every comedian who's been doing it as long as I have, which is like 15 years, we've all seen somebody
Right.
And then they're more famous than us 5 years later.
Right. Well, does that have to do with them doing better work or not? There's that question as well.
I mean, it has to do with them, like, putting in the 10,000 hours, figuring out what that thing is, the magic, the special sauce,
mm-hmm.
and then, like, but if you don't get there, if you don't flip that switch, I don't think that having the funniest jokes in the world is gonna make you successful. I think you have to be able to cross over that line where, like, the audience is comfortable and you're comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that just takes practice.
Well, it's
like exposure therapy.
Yeah, I had an experience recently that sort of bears that out. I'm a musician and I've been doing it for a while, and I had what I think was the best show maybe that I've ever had at an open mic feature here recently, where everything just felt good. I felt confident. I felt like I belonged there. And then I realized I got home and WAAF, the Bay State rock station, had played one of my songs to hype the gig, and I realized that I recorded it 17 years ago. And,
wow.
And I released it in 2000, and I'm sitting and I'm looking at my computer and I'm looking at the date on the bottom right-hand corner, and it says 2017, and thinking, "Whoa, how did that happen? How is it 17 years ago that I wrote that song and I still play it and it still seems fresh to me somehow, and now it works better than it ever has."
Yeah, and like I think Gary Goldman said that when I was a baby comic. He said something like, if these kids knew how long it was going to take them to get good, they wouldn't do it. You have to not believe that you're going to take that long in order to get going.
Right, yeah, and on the other side, the audience is there thinking, there's a surprising amount of people who feel like you're just sort of making it up right there on the stage.
Yeah, and I think a ton of people in the world just think that it's like the same as being the funny person at the party.
Right. Or
like the most charming person at the dinner party. And if you're not that and you are a comedian, your family is very worried for you all the time.
Yes. Yeah, I think there are a lot of people who just aren't necessarily the funny person in their real life or funny on stage. What was the who was it? There was a writer that had that off-quoted sort of, what is it, a trope about being normal in your regular life so that you can be extraordinary in your art, in your work and on stage. Do you know the quote?
I don't, but I love that idea so much. Because I often think, like, I was at a party once. It was like a fundraiser, so it was like I didn't know anybody, and I was with my husband, and we were just there to support the cause that we were, giving money to. And there was a woman who was there by herself, and she was in her 40s or 50s, and she came up to us and she just started holding court. She was very charming, very funny. She told us a couple funny stories. She was super interested in making us laugh and holding our attention. And she, to her, everything was just a hoot. And she had to tell you why it was the funniest thing. And she walked away, and I was like, that is how I would be if I didn't do stand-up comedy. But I have this outlet for all of that. And that is, why I am more quiet and reserved in other settings.
Yeah, well,
I often hear people be like, I can't see you as a comedian. And they come see it, and they're like, oh, my goodness. You're like a different person. And I'm like, yeah.
Well, you have to be. You have to be. Yeah, they always have to create, even if you're being you on stage, you have to create another you to be on stage. That's a concept that I think is hard for people to grasp. And when people are if people are engaging and funny in real life, that's because maybe you're not expecting them to be. If they sort of pop into the conversation and say something funny, you've caught people off guard. But then you're standing on stage with a bunch of people staring at you, thinking, well, you'd better be funny.
as I paid money to be here. And that's a
oh God, it's so different.
Yeah, and you need that sort of in between. You need that something in between, even if it's the thinnest of veneers. You need something in between you and that audience.
Yeah, and like you need to have some control, right? And so developing that control and the various tools that you call upon to take control of that situation is becoming a comedian. That and writing material, finding your voice, all that stuff. You know, it's different people use different words for the alchemy, but there's so many moving parts that it's hard to articulate. It's like, you know, people being the dog whisperer, right? Like, it's body language, it's confidence, it's so many things that, like, it's hard to explain and teach to people. I've always felt like the dog whisperer and super nanny were, like, great teachers for comedians because they're, like, all about asserting control and like a kind of confidence of like I am 100% in control of the situation and you, child or dog, I'm not going to hurt you, I'm not going to humiliate you, I'm not going to freak out at you, and I'm not going to constrain you too much. I'm going to give you some freedom. But like there are limits and I say what they are.
Right. Plus there's that handy noise that the dog whisperer has, that shh to make it. If you can use that on a stand-up stage to
Exactly, and like Super Nanny had like this, like she had this like scold that she had. So like it was a certain voice where she'd be like, "This is the voice where you have to tell them that you're angry at them," and you'd be like, "I'm very upset with you." And you go up and then down. So that's how I address. When I'm in front of an audience, I either make the little shit noise or I scold them and shake my finger.
As much
and
as
that's why I'm such a famous popular comedian.
As much as I hate the heckler videos because they set up sort of an unrealistic expectation, I think for people as far as the dynamic between the comedian and audience, I think it would be amazing to see a video of somebody shushing a heckler using the dog whisperer techniques. Just somebody screaming something stupid and making the noise and watching them heal would be.
Yes, exactly.
So we spoke a few months ago about the cake tour and the Kickstarter idea that you had used. Started putting up a Kickstarter for each stop along a tour and raising money that way. What was the post-mortem on that? How did that go? Did that prove to be a viable method of touring?
Yeah, we actually, we did about 50% of the shows on that 10-city tour were Kickstarter funded, and it turned out to be really amazing. It was really effective. And then we had our final party at Kickstarter headquarters at the end of the run. I think it's like doing it again in the future. We talked about how, right now you can't run concurrent Kickstarter campaigns, but I think that that's sort of like perhaps a better way for Kickstarter to serve artists in this way if they want to continue to sell tickets this way and help artists tour this way. To be able to do them instead of back-to-back, do them at the same time. Because you need like 30 days for a Kickstarter campaign. And so that means if you're doing 5 cities, you got to start like 6 months out.
Right.
And then people don't plan their weekends that way, in my experience.
Right.
So there were some bugs along the way. We were guinea pigs, and we were happy just that it was successful and that we were able to hit all those cities and reach our funding goals and like also attract additional audience members when we got to those towns as well.
And are you planning on touring with Cake again anytime soon? This is 4 comedians that started out with the Pink Comedy Collar tour for people who people who are unfamiliar. Yeah,
we are. We're talking about it. We've been invited to do some shows and festivals in the new year, so everybody should stay tuned. It's takecomedy.com.
And you said in a recent interview that you'd been working on a follow-up novel to Vow of Celibacy, but the project didn't seem relevant after the election. Have you resolved that? How did the election throw you off track?
I was writing a novel that was set, I don't know if you know this exactly, but like in 2012, the Supreme Court ruled that the Defense of Marriage Act was unconstitutional.
Mm-hmm.
And then, in 2014, the Supreme Court ruled that gay marriage had to be legal in all 50 states.
Yes.
But in those 2 years in between, there was this patchwork system where different states had different rights. And there were a lot of initiatives to target specific states to try to improve, to try to get marriage equality in those specific states and get, constitutional amendments against same-sex marriage knocked off their constitutions, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was writing a novel about an activist it was set in those 2 years, and there were a lot of characters in the novel, but one of them was an activist who was involved in this work in those interceding 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And it was fun, and it was another sort of fun, sexy type thing. It was about marriage, right? And it was about same-sex couples and also heterosexual couples, all these friends, basically, in their early 30s, trying to figure out whether they want to get married or not.
Mm-hmm.
So the problem when Trump got elected is that, talk about absurdity, right? We kind of went from the sort of Obama-era problems that we had of, we need to push for marriage equality and push for trans equality. We're still fighting for those things, but we now have, opponents in power in every branch of government. And so it's less fun as a book to me, because the key part of these 2 years is that, the momentum was building for same-sex marriage nationally.
Mm-hmm.
And so these people were, basically same-sex couples all over the country were, anticipating being able to get married. Mm-hmm. And it was, this fun moment of, oh, crap, if we have marriage rights, does that mean we're going to get married, you and me? These couples that never had to consider that, basically.
Uh-huh.
And so that's what I wanted to play with. And I was working on it for a while, and there's, all these different characters, but, man, it just feels tone deaf now to be working on it. Even as I was writing it, it was set in the recent past.
Uh-huh.
It now feels like focusing on that time. It's almost sad.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost sad to revisit that feeling of Obama's in the White House, things are going great, we have all these progressive ideals for the future, things are moving in a progressive direction.
Mm-hmm.
And feeling now specifically same-sex rights, LGBT rights, trans rights, so many people are in the crosshairs, so many people that the characters that I was working with,
mm-hmm.
that, one of them is an immigrant, and, there's just, and several of them have immigrant parents, and so, so many of these elements are suddenly recast in a different light.
Well, does that just mean...
in the contemporary political situation.
Does that just mean that now you have a giant plot twist in your book, or do you put the book aside and maybe return to it at a later date? Where does this leave you as a writer?
That's what I was thinking. I was thinking I have to kind of see what happens right now, but working on it right now doesn't feel fun because it just feels like a lost future.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that it is one, but it's much more tragic knowing how things go 3 years later.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm putting it aside for now, and I think it's a good idea to set something in that 2-year period, and maybe in another 5 years it'll feel like something I can write. But right now it's I'm working on other stuff that I think is cool, and I think also is relevant to the contemporary political situation, even though we're in an upsetting situation right now. Mm-hmm. But that particular novel, it needs a minute right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you start work on another novel? Do you just work on screenplays and other things in the meantime until?
Yeah, I'm working on a couple of pilots. I've been working on one pilot for a few years that I think is really great. I've been working on another pilot that is based on the novel,
mm-hmm.
which is cool and fun. So it's like a valid celibacy pilot. And then I'm working on a couple of other pilots for, like, more ambitious projects that I've been kicking around for a while. And like I said, like, in the Trump era, they actually feel really relevant and exciting. So I'm putting my energy into those.
Did the election change the way you write and approach your stand-up as well?
I mean, I think that I grew up with gay parents in Texas. And so a lot of my mission of my stand-up has always been to kind of uplift people who are feeling down, or, like, you know, kind of present to people that the situation isn't, that you can still make light of a situation that's difficult, and you can be uplifted, and you deserve to be uplifted even when the circumstances are difficult. And so I feel like I've returned to my roots with that stuff, with comedy. Like, I really just want to make people happy for the evening. Especially, like, you know, traveling with Kate, we went on tour, and we were in all kinds of places, including, like, Atlanta, Georgia, and, like, Raleigh, North Carolina. And a lot of these big cities are, like, blue enclaves in these red states. And they feel really alienated and bad. You know, like, I don't have Trump-supporting relatives. You know, these people do.
Right.
You know, they really want to hear uplifting messages. And so it's nice to be able to make them feel represented and good and happy and encouraged and uplifted and less pessimistic and downtrodden.
I think Barry Crimmins said something once along the lines of, you know, like somebody would accuse him of preaching to the choir, and he said, well, you know, every once in a while the choir needs preaching too.
Yeah, and every once in a while the choir needs a laugh.
Right. Well, do you find, I mean, this has been something that's been written about fairly extensively, I think, in the past 6 months. Do you find audiences are terribly different? Do you find they're more polarized suddenly after the election than they were beforehand?
No, I really haven't. If anything, I've found that, like, in the past, there's been more of a desire in, like, southern states. Audiences are like, hey, like, we don't need to talk about politics. They're like, hey, political differences are whatever. But now southern states, they're just like, yes, give us your confident blue state energy. Like, you know, like, I don't think a lot, I mean, you know, there's certain audiences that are kind of traditionally going to be more Republican. I think when you're playing, like, a resort community or an exurb type community, you know, the audience tends to be pretty white. They all drive SUVs, like, you know, and so I kind of, you know, I tell those people jokes and I entertain them, but when I get to perform in all these cities, you know, people are sharp. They read the news. They're interested in what's going on. And in my experience, the ones coming out to comedy clubs where I'm performing aren't big Trump supporters. So
but
that's sort of the situation.
Do you not want to be able to make those people laugh as well, to make the people who disagree with you laugh?
I certainly do. And I do when I'm doing these, like, gigs in the sort of resort communities and exurbs. But I don't talk about politics. I'm not trying to make them laugh at politics right now. Because it's, to me, there's, like, too much. I mean, it depends on what you consider to be politics, right? Like, I talk about LGBT stuff all the time. And I'm talking about it from my perspective, and I'm expecting them to get on board, and they do. You know? But, and that is political in its way, but it's not jokes about Jeff Sessions. You know? And I think that that's something that I don't have a taste in my mouth for doing for anybody right now.
Or for confronting somebody about what their politics might be when they're out trying to enjoy themselves.
I think in general, my job in front of people who might support Donald Trump or Jeff Sessions is to be like, hey, I am this kind of person. So in the future, if you're ever in a situation where you think, I have never met a person like that, I don't know why gay people should be able to raise kids. I hope that I'll pop into your brain, and you'll be like, oh, that redheaded lady, she was raised by gay parents. Seems fine, you know? So I think I'm just there to kind of represent my experience and try to demonize my own group.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's that sort of that split between, okay, I don't want to, I'm not out here to be a dancing monkey and just sort of, have no content to what I'm saying, but I also would like everybody to enjoy themselves. How do you split that line? It seems like there are times when you might be given the choice of one or the other.
Well, I mean, I think also, like, if you're from a group where you're considered some kind of minority or different,
mm-hmm.
you can either play to the stereotype to get laughs
mm-hmm.
from a general audience, or you can challenge it. And I think that most of us are, part stereotype, part completely unique.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much no matter who we are. We have some stereotypical experiences that are typical of our race, class, gender, religion, ethnicity, region,
mm-hmm.
all this stuff. And then we have some stuff where it's just like, oh my goodness, that's totally unique. That's just you.
Mm-hmm.
And we're all a mixture of all those things.
Right, and sometimes being just you is a political act.
Exactly. So, humanizing yourself, not being like, oh, well, this audience clearly doesn't want me to come out to them. I've never done that. I come out to everybody,
mm-hmm.
And that's it. They can deal with that. I've never had people be like, people say to me all the time, like, wow, gay parents in Texas, that must have been hard. But I get that from all sides of the political spectrum. And it was hard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
where would it have been easy? If it was hard in Texas, where would it have been?
Yeah, it was 1990. Will and Grace wasn't on TV yet.
Right.
Ellen DeGeneres hadn't come out of the closet yet. It was not the America we know now with its respect. Don't Ask, Don't Tell was you still got kicked out of the military for being gay.
Uh-huh. Well, now you get kicked out of the military for being transgendered if that actually becomes policy.
The generals are like, yeah, we're not doing that. So
yeah. Well, that's the other thing that
I think
about the sort of hysteria of the time. It's not as if there aren't a lot of things that deserve your concern, but the hysteria doesn't help you make a level-headed argument for your beliefs.
Yeah, there's a lot of mechanisms in place right now with the way social media toys with our brains
mm-hmm.
to try to make us freak out all the time. That's a really lucrative thing for them to do, is make us panicked and outraged.
Uh-huh.
So, it's going really well for them. And,
yes.
I think everybody should just be aware of the company Cambridge Analytica and Steve Bannon and his, social media outrage, whether it's on the left or the right, his pockets get lined.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an important thing to understand about the messaging of this administration. They understand social media and they understand reality television.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that the rest of us, many of us even in the entertainment industry, don't understand the psychology behind. But if we're not going to be manipulated right now and paralyzed and exploited, we need to be really aware of all the psychological methods that are being used to control us.
Well, how do you communicate that idea in a funny way?
Yeah, I am actually consulting on a play in London where my friend is working on doing just that. So I'm writing some comedy for that, and I'm really excited about how that's going to turn out.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that theater is a great way to do it, because stand-up is you don't want to have that much of a preamble when you're talking about stuff.
Right.
You don't want to have to be like, let me explain to you all these things about, the background of all these psychological tools and everything, and how
right.
artificial intelligence is created by Facebook work.
All right,
and now I'm going to make some jokes about it.
Before I get to the punchline,
she has more leeway to kind of delve into what's actually going on.
Mm-hmm. Like, before I get to the punchline, I'm assuming all of you have read the syllabus.
Exactly. Like, did you do the reading? If not, get the Cliff Notes version. Everybody will reconvene here in 5 minutes.
Right. Okay, so just to finish up, the book is Vow of Celibacy, and it's available on Amazon and on some indie publishers as well. I think I can't remember which ones you listed on the site at the moment.
Well, I mean, everybody can get Vow of Celibacy ordered to their local independent bookstore, have the book in stock. So that's a great way to do it. If you're bargain hunting and you like your e-reader, Vow of Celibacy is on sale for $1.99 at the Kindle store for the whole month of August.
Mm-hmm.
So that's great. It's really a big honor to be like part of that promotion, and I'm psyched that Amazon picked the book.
Mm-hmm.
But I love independent bookstores, and I definitely think everybody should. If you love paper books, like that's the way to go.
Mm-hmm. And where do people find out more information about all of this?
ErinJudge.com, ErinJudge, has all this information. My Twitter is @ErinJudge, and it has direct links to the Amazon sale.
Mm-hmm.
And on my website, you can search IndieBound for places to buy the book
mm-hmm.
In person.
And you can also find more information about Cake Comedy at cakecomedy.com, I believe?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Well, thanks for taking the time to speak with me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Nick. It's a pleasure as always, and congratulations on your new home.
Oh.
I hope your dog is very happy there, and also you and your wife.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much for that.
All right. Have a good one.
Okay, you too. Thank you.
An arrow to the head isn't always a trick.
Thanks again to Erin Judge for the conversation. As she mentioned there at the end, we did just move into a new house with a nice spacious yard for our dog Lucy to run around in. You can find Vow of Celibacy on Amazon or order it from your local bookshop. And you can find out more about Erin and see if she's coming to a town near you to do stand-up at erinjudge.com. And now, Photograph of the Future from Zion Rodman's album, You're Invited. I first saw Rodman play a couple of months ago when we were on the same bill. He's got an amazing voice. You'll hear that immediately here. And he's a great songwriter. I'm sorry to say we're about to lose him here in Boston, but our loss is Chicago's gain. He'll be heading out there at the end of August, but no doubt we'll all be hearing more from him. Find out more about him at zionrodmanmusic.com. And now, here's Zion Rodman, Photograph of the Future.
I took a photograph of the future, of what it should have been, and it was you, my best friend, 1 year later, with a clear road ahead. And I took a photograph of the future, of what it should have been, and it was her next to me, except she was a little more than just my friend. But it's fine, they're still here, still keeping me fed at the end of the line. That's what's clear inside of my head. But the worst is knowing that there ain't no other reason other than I did not know just what to say. And like you, I don't know where it is I'm going, but that don't make me feel any more okay. I took a photograph of the future, of what it should have been, and it was you calling me on a weekend to see me again. And I took that photograph of the future when I was so much closer to you, 'cause I think I should be feeling so much more now that I know you'll be leaving soon. But these lines that we choose and that we travel never seem to coincide in parallel. They twist and turn and curve in reverse direction. photograph of the future in the daytime. I took a photograph of the future in the nighttime. And the light from the sun and the light from the moon never seem to shine as bright as when they're not there with you, but only in your mind. Thinking about next year.
Neil Young!